Daily podcast, a place where I interview tech leaders, CEOs, entrepreneurs, futurists, technologists, thought leaders, and even the occasional celebrity about how they are leveraging technology to transform their business. Now, cybersecurity spending is constantly increasing, but let's face facts here, so are cyber attacks and data breaches. And most organisations have a number of tech solutions in place to detect, identify and respond to the problem. But the part they're missing is how to operationalize cybersecurity, instill it into their culture and make it a part of their business processes. To talk about this today is Jason Hart. Now, the last time I spoke to him was 6 years ago. I think he was at Gemalto back then. But today, he is the CTO and EMEA at Rapid7. And as I'm sure many of you know, organisations all around the globe rely on Rapid7 technology, services and research to securely advance their initiatives. And they're better known for their Insight Cloud that simplifies the complex and helps security teams reduce vulnerabilities and monitor for malicious behaviour, etc. But today, we're going to talk about why the way that every organisation thinks about security needs to change and the steps that they could take to embed that change throughout their business. And Jason's also going to walk us through the core elements organisations need in place to guarantee a solid foundation for a secure business, including things like culture and accountability. Now, on this podcast, we've recorded more than 2,300 interviews and covered just about every security issue that you can imagine. And I recently read that given a choice of allowing your friends to spend 15 minutes in your home unsupervised or 15 minutes unsupervised on your smartphone, nearly everyone said in the report, the home, because the thought of having someone accessing their phone was just the stuff of nightmares. You hear my opinions every single day, but today I want to ask you, what annoys you about the lack of privacy online? And the fact that someone out there knows absolutely everything you do online, and whether you like it or not, that is your internet service provider. But if you wanted to stop your internet service provider from always looking over your shoulder and profiting from your data, well, I'm going to recommend Private Internet Access, which is the world's most transparent VPN provider with over 30 million downloads. I think it's the perfect software for staying private online because it hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection. And it's easy to use. There are many apps available for all operating systems, and most attractive of all, PIA has servers in 84 countries and in all 50 states. One subscription can protect up to 10 devices at once. And the reason I say this is my son is currently touring Southeast Asia, and he told me that Private Internet Access protects him while he's working away on numerous networks and also allows him to access his favourite TV shows at home. But I want to hear your stories too. And if you too would like to enjoy all the benefits of Private Internet Access, now is the time to subscribe. Simply head to piavpn.com/techtalksdaily and get an 83% discount. Seriously, 83%. That works out at just $2.03 a month, because you'll get 4 extra months completely for free. But to activate it, you must go to piavpn.com/techtalksdaily for a truly private digital life. One last time, piavpn.com/techtalksdaily. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to the UK, where Jason is waiting to join us once again. So a massive warm welcome back to the show, Jason. It's been 6 years since we last spoke. Can you just remind the listeners with a little about who you are and what you do? Because that's a long time, and I suspect a few things have changed since we last spoke.
Yeah, hi, Neil, and thank you for having me back. Crikey, 6 years has flown by since we last spoke. So I think the last time we spoke, Neil, I was CTO at Gemalto. So yes.
So obviously, the last time we spoke, you were at Gemalto, but can you bring it up to speed with what you've been doing in the last 6 years? We're all focused on just heading forward, but it's not too often we look back and see just what we've been up to over that time. So what have you been doing?
Yeah, so obviously still in cybersecurity. You know, I'd like to think cybersecurity is kind of a part of my DNA. So I left. When did I leave Gemalto? I left Gemalto about coming up to 3.5 years ago now, Neil, and then went into support a private equity company in a turnaround company that they had acquired. Mainly it's kind of an element of cybersecurity, but more around kind of in embedment of cryptography within chips.
And of course, also the last time we spoke, the world was a very different place 6 years ago. It's amazing to think just how much has changed. But can you tell me more about the way that organizations think about security now needs to change? Because we have gone from this, everyone working in an office, to almost a giant experiment of working from home almost overnight, to hybrid working and any device at any time and any network. There's so much going on there. But can you just expand on that?
Yeah, I think so. I joined Rapid7 coming up to about 10 months ago now, Neil.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons for joining Rapid7 was kind of the culture and approach to cybersecurity. And ultimately that, as we've spoken about before, that kind of aligns very, very well with my passion and my desire for organizations to be doing really the right thing. I think over the past 6 years since we last spoke, Neil, the world has spent considerably more money on cybersecurity. But actually, if you look at the facts and look at the data, it seems the more that organizations spend, the more breaches occur. And for me, that's an evolving challenge and problem that I'm seeing continually on a daily basis around the world.
And as you said, cybersecurity spending is constantly increasing, but of course, so are cyber attacks and data breaches. And organizations have a number of tech solutions in place to detect, identify, and respond to them. But can I ask you that you expand on the part that they're missing and how they need to operationalize cybersecurity and instill it in their culture and make it a part of their business process? Because there's so much going on here. It's not just about getting the new tech solution off the shelf, is there?
No, totally. If we step back and, for most of the listeners watching who's kind of aware of cybersecurity, kind of involved, cybersecurity really, for it to be successful and to be executed as part of the business process within an organization, it's not just a technology, a component or technology element. You've got the process and you've got the people element of it. But if we really step back, Neil, and look at the cybersecurity industry itself, it is a very unique industry. And unlike other business components, it's one of only very few elements that touches every single part of an organization. So ultimately, what's happening, organizations are just consuming technology, but is that technology aligned with the goals and the objectives of an organization? Is that technology part of the business process? Is everyone in an organization clearly aware of their goals and their objectives and what they're accountable for cybersecurity? And ultimately, from what I'm seeing, Neil, very few organizations are. They're consuming technology and using technology, but they're not operationalizing that technology and making it part of the business process.
So I'm curious, Jason, from everything that you're seeing there's going to be a lot of business leaders listening, and they know they need to do something different. They know that they need to up their game, but knowing where to start can be incredibly daunting and even overwhelming. So the big question is, where should a business begin, and what steps should they take to embed that change throughout the business?
Yeah, I think first of all, I've kind of pulled together like a 5-stage kind of framework, but people think security is just the security technology, as I've spoken about. But you need to step back and really look at the foundational elements which are supporting the security function or the need to reduce risk in the organization. So the first thing is culture. What is the general culture around the organization? Normally, when I speak to CISOs or heads of security, they say culture is great. My immediate question back to them is, okay, so tell me what HR own around cybersecurity. The immediate answer is, well, I don't know. Okay, so how can your wider culture be actually flourishing with an organization? So we need to look at what is the culture. The second one is a measurement. What is the level of risk within the organization? Now, again, abstract, people just say, well, we have a minimal level of risk, or we have ISO 27001, or PCI, or we have cyber essentials. That doesn't necessarily identify the true level of risk. Risk and measurement needs to be defined by scope. All organizations and all the leaders listening to this podcast today is you're moving for transitions, you're moving workloads, you're spinning up new cloud instances. The risk in a particular container or component of the cloud could be different to risk actually on premise. So we need to look at how we measure. The second element is accountability. So once we've got culture, an element of culture, once we've got measurement, who is accountable for addressing the problems that have been identified, or the risks? Now, the biggest challenge and problem I'm actually seeing now is around all three of those elements. But accountability is by far the biggest challenge and problem I'm seeing with leaders, IT leaders within an organization. Now, let me talk a bit about what I mean around accountability.
Sure.
Organizations are investing in technology. The technology is identifying threats and risks. In order for those risks that are identified, or threats which have been identified, to be remediated, it's reliant on other parts of the organization to actually undertake the remediation. Now, if an operating model within an organization has not been clearly communicated, clearly documented, or even going back to the very simple elements of RACI, the remediation and accountability does not take place. So a really great example would be a security team. They've bought some vulnerability management technology. They're continually identifying vulnerabilities, but are reliant on the development team or the engineering team to remediate those problems. Development and engineering are saying, well, hold on, we're not really clearly accountable for that, because product management and engineering are driven by the product management. So ultimately, unless product management with a clearly allocated amount of time in the backlog every 2 weeks during the sprint, or 3 weeks, depending on your sprint life cycle, the problem's not going to remediate. So it's a business issue around communication. What's your current operating model, and what's your target operating model for cybersecurity? Now, Neil, there's a huge amount in there, and I'm just going to stop a second.
No problem at all, because there is so many changes now, especially with the introduction of zero trust in the last 6 years or more, because traditionally everyone trusted everything on the inside of the network and didn't trust anything outside, treated everything as a threat. But of course, everything is up for grabs now. So are there any steps that businesses should make around how to identify what is a risk and what isn't?
Great question. So the first thing I say to business leaders is really simple. I need you to step back. And if you were to receive a phone call from myself tomorrow to say that you've been compromised or you've been breached, what business function would you give you that OMG moment?
Yeah.
Or normally I use other expressions around that, Neil. But if you were to get a phone call tomorrow to say a particular business function had been compromised or been breached, which business function would you go, oh no, did the bad guys get to that business function? So that's my first question to the audience. Can you actually answer that? Secondly, have you clearly documented that? Because what's happening, Neil, is that organizations are spraying technology everywhere, but unless you've clearly identified the scope based on business function and data type, you're going to end up with a vanilla level of security across your whole organization. So the proportion of security control relative to the potential impact doesn't align.
And the golden rule, of course, is if you can measure it, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. So what metrics and outcomes should organizations be prioritizing? Because you've got everything documented. How do you then begin to measure the outcomes?
Yeah, brilliant question. Again, cybersecurity is, we've had this amazing ability over the past kind of 30 years since when I've been in the industry. It's always been a very technical, very mystique industry. And anyone within the security function listening today, we need to evolve as an industry from being kind of the know people, the silo, the island, and taking the broader organization on a journey. And ultimately, it's all about communication, leadership, and outcomes. Presenting a 100-page vulnerability report around technical detail doesn't help in any way. If anything, it just creates barriers. It doesn't help the stakeholders contextualize what they need to address from a business perspective. So the best way of measuring, and measuring needs to be around effectiveness, change of effectiveness. How are we making security part of the business process? It's using KPIs. And a concept that I've come up with is called protection level agreements. So within an organization, within the stakeholders in the board, they agree a level of protection level agreement. In the simplest form, it's an SLA around security measurement, security controls. And then KPIs underpin that. And underneath the KPIs is the data from the security technology. By measuring this in a non-technical way, in this approach, you can actually track the effectiveness and the level of maturity across an organization.
And I know you've earned your stripes in the cybersecurity battlefield, and I suspect that you have more than a few war stories along the way, Jason. So do you have any good examples that might inspire leaders listening, just to help them understand the kind of journey that they can go on? Maybe provide a before and after example?
Yeah, so ultimately, I'd like to challenge everyone here today listening is kind of, can you clearly visualize and show accountability and auditability from a board member or a leadership perspective around your effectiveness around cybersecurity in a non-technical way? If you can't, and the majority of people listening it will be the case for, I need you to kind of just step back. I need you to understand your current operating model. Are you asking the right questions to the technology team, to the security team? And have them start presenting cybersecurity effectiveness in a way that you understand. By doing this, you can start making cybersecurity part of the business process. And a really good example, Neil, would be a very large, very well-known global brand I worked with for 6 months. And ultimately, the cost of security was increasing. There was huge amounts of complexity, and there was a breakdown between the security and IT team and the broader organization on actually translating the potential impact of what was required from a cybersecurity perspective to make it part of the business process. By taking some of the steps and the approach that I've outlined in creating a target operator model driven by KPIs, protection level agreements, which measures effectiveness and outcomes, they were able to decentralize cybersecurity. Because ultimately, what we want to be able to do is we want the security team to identify the threats, the vulnerabilities, and the risks, present that to different business functions and leadership within the organization. And for those other different business functions and stakeholders within the organization to be accountable and to make those decisions. Ultimately, for cybersecurity to be effective and part of the business process, everyone in an organization needs to be measured, needs to be made accountable for the actions and the outcomes. Cybersecurity is a business issue. It's not a cybersecurity team issue.
100% with you. And your passion for cybersecurity, Jason, really shines through in our conversation today. And let's look at the best case scenario here. Everyone listens to this conversation and others like it and starts to think differently about security. What excites you about that future where organizations are all thinking differently about security and the different opportunities it could unlock? Is there anything in particular that particularly excites you about that?
I think we've come a long way in the industry. When we've spoken in the past, Neil, the stakeholders, leaders within organizations, it was, actually getting budgets was a challenge, was a problem. And I think we've kind of gone the other way in some sense. The floodgates have opened for, the spend on cybersecurity. So we kind of just got to get the balance right. And I think what really, really excites me over the coming years is actually watching organizations make security part of the business process. If we look at the IT industry, it's taken 30, 40 years for, controls, procedures, governance, budgets, accountability around IT. Cybersecurity is on that same journey. And for me, cybersecurity is a cost of doing business. It can be a huge enabler, but until it's part of the business process and considered as a normal thing, then ultimately, we're not going to progress. But I'm starting to see rays of sunshine on this, people looking at it as a business process. And I think finally, Neil, for me, if I was to go to a board meeting tomorrow within one of my customers, and say to that board of one of my customers, your EBIT dial is going to drop next quarter, from a financial control perspective, they would understand what levers to adjust to make EBITDA positive within that organization. And that's exactly what we need to do for cybersecurity. We need to be able to present the appropriate information to a board and allow them to adjust levers to accept risk, mitigate risk, or transfer risk. And this is how we need to evolve in managing cyber risk within organizations. Because going into the future, organizations will not be able to mitigate every single risk. It has to be contextual, and we need to mitigate the risks that are most appropriate to that organization, and every organization is different. And that's no different to a P&L or a balance sheet of a business.
Such an inspiring vision. And I cannot thank you enough, Jason, for coming on and sharing your insights today. But before I do let you go, I always ask my guests to leave everyone listening with a pearl of wisdom. So we last spoke 10 years ago. I'm going to ask you, what have you been reading in the last 6 years? And if there is a book that we can add to our Amazon wish list for listeners to check out. All I'm going to ask, though, is what are you going to leave us with and why?
Yeah, I think, Neil, you may have been one of the first people to say it to me many, many years ago, an element of craziness. People, some of the ideas and thoughts I come across. And I actually met this individual, and he was so inspiring. And the book is by Adam Stitzler. And the book is called The Right Kind of Crazy. And what I love about this book, it's a true story of teamwork, leadership, and high-stakes innovation. And for me, it's just a fascinating book. And I think I'm on the third time of reading it in the past 3 years. And for anyone who's kind of recognizes the name, Adam was inspirational in sending the latest rocket to space.
Oh, man, I'm going to be checking that out. That sounds fantastic. That sounds right up my street. So I'll get that added to the Amazon wish list. And obviously, we're talking about Rapid7 today. For anyone interested in connecting with you, your team, or just finding out more information about Rapid7 and keep up to speed with the work you're doing there, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, I think to the audience and anyone listening, if you're interested in the concept of which I'm been heavily pushing, operationalizing cybersecurity, reach out to me on LinkedIn or go to rapid7.com and subscribe to a number of Bright Talks and WebExes that I'm currently holding to give you real takeaways and blueprints on how you measure effectiveness and operationalize cybersecurity within your organization.
Well, it's been a pleasure as always, Jason. Love chatting with you about the core elements organizations need in place to guarantee a solid foundation for secure businesses, including things like culture and accountability, and how to identify what is a risk and what isn't, and how to operationalize cybersecurity so it becomes a business process. But more than anything, just great to catch up with you. You left us with a great book too. The only promise I'm going to leave you is we can't leave it 6 years till we talk again. So thanks for joining me today, Jason.
Thank you, Neil, for having me.
And hopefully you learned a few things today, because yes, you can go on the Rapid7 website, learn about their tech services and research to securely advanced security initiatives, the visibility, analytics and automation delivered through their Insight Cloud, how it simplifies the complex and helps security teams reduce vulnerabilities, etc. But what I loved about today's conversation was that part that many businesses are missing, and that is how to operationalize their cybersecurity, instill it in their culture, make it part of their business processes. That is the key takeaway for today's conversation for me. But obviously, you've heard from me, you've heard from Jason today. You might have a completely different approach, different opinion. Maybe we just simply missed something from the conversation today. Whatever it is, I'd love to invite you here to share your experiences too. And there are a number of ways you can do that. You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. Hold down the audio button, ask me a question, leave a statement, whatever it might be. I can feature that in a future episode. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. And equally, if you just want to ask me a question one-on-one, or you want to come on the podcast, whatever it is, my door is open to each and every one of you. But that's it for today's conversation. Tomorrow we'll tackle something completely different. But just a big thank you for listening today. And until next time, don't be a stranger.